Celebrating 10 years of trailblazing in ground support, Exceed marks a decade as your leading partner in ground support equipment leasing. At the forefront of both short-term and long-term leasing solutions, Exceed adapts to your unique operational needs. Whether you're ramping up for peak season or planning for long-term growth, we provide the right equipment to keep your operations running smoothly. This anniversary, we renew our dedication to empowering your ground operations with efficiency and innovation. With Exceed, you're equipped for success today and prepared for the challenges of tomorrow. Exceed, driving excellence on the ground year after year. Explore more at exceedgse.com.
This is Brad Compton.
This is Luke Brown. This is Jeff Barrett.
This is Tessa Fasen, and you are listening to the GSE podcast.
All right. Well, welcome to the GSE podcast. I'm Matt Weitzel, and I'm here with Joe Annotti from TRC. How you doing today?
Appreciate it, Matt. Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So you're in Jacksonville, Florida. Is that correct?
Just a little north of here, yeah.
Yeah, not a bad drive over. We are currently, if you're watching on video, you can see that we're at Oshkosh Aerotech, and they've been nice enough to let us use their facilities today to record this episode.
Absolutely.
And I really appreciate you coming down. I think this is a very important topic. I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of our audience, they don't know what TRC is.
Sure.
So could you maybe start and kind of explain what TRC is?
Yeah, absolutely. So TRC is a global engineering, advisory services and consulting firm. We do a lot of work in the utility space. And so if you kind of look at the life cycle of an energy molecule, an electron from generation to transmission, distribution, and consumption, TRC has elements in play on all those different spaces. My particular specialty is on the very tail end of that, on the consumption side, where we are responsible for clean transportation project development, effectively. So looking at opportunities for using energy in the most efficient and effective means in whatever kind of transportation applications are relevant at the time.
Okay, so what does that mean for people in ground support equipment?
Yeah, big and vague. So I mean, basically, if it has wheels and can be done better, more efficiently, we're involved. And so, historically speaking, our company, which used to be called Gladstein Neandros and Associates, we were acquired last year by TRC, has been in the on-road trucking space. And you kind of look at the evolution of clean freight movement in the U.S. historically, and still very much a diesel-focused sector. Looking at means to making it better. So, 20 years ago, it was like, hey, let's put some fairings and skirts on our trailers and make it more aerodynamic. Then the advancements in natural gas in the early 90s with the utilities, particularly gas utilities, bringing on a better combustible fuel source, then propane, and then hybrids. And now we're very much in the electrification era with battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell. And that transition is now very much active in the GSE space. We've seen it, hugely proactive companies have electrifying their ground support equipment efforts, and this is baggage tractors and pushbacks and any of the cargo stuff. And so we're active in that space because of the capital expenditures associated with that movement. You look at a conventional diesel vehicle, maybe 125,000. To go zero now, it's 2, 3, 4 times that. And to make those types of capital investments, often incentives come into play. And that's what my particular practice is responsible for, is the identification of incentive opportunities, navigating that landscape, going out and securing those funds, and then ultimately making sure that the projects are implemented accordingly.
Okay, so like government grants would be something that your company would help out with.
And governments of all shapes and sizes. I mean, I think that's one of the misnomers right now. And there's been a lot of noise over the past few weeks, of course, about this, is that, people think about government grants for clean transportation projects. They just default to the EPA. And to a lot of extent, that's true. EPA is a huge funder of these projects. And since about 2008, with the National Clean Diesel Campaign and the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, absolutely has been at the forefront of funding for these types of projects. But there's a whole slew of other federal agencies as well as state and regional authorities that are in this game as well. On an annual basis, the incentives market is probably $2 to $3 billion annually. It's a huge, huge market. My team tracks 750 or so different incentive programs and that's just US and Canada. We have a partner in Berlin that does a similar thing for the EU and UK. And it's a very, very busy landscape and constantly evolving. Obviously, the recent election is going to change some things, and certainly can chat a little bit about that if that's of interest. But basically we work with our clientele to identify what the right funding solution is for them. Go out and secure it and make sure it's gone about in the right way. These grants aren't just sort of charitable donations as much as we'd like them to be.
Yeah.
These are contracts with government authorities, and that can be burdensome to certain corporations that may not want to take upon that burden.
Yeah. Well, I have a million questions,
Sure.
but let's start with who is Joe Annotti? So how did you get to TRC? What did that look like?
Yeah,
what's your background?
I come out of the oil and gas space, so I'm a heavy industry guy. I was in my background is in geology. I'm from Tulane, so I was in the oil and gas space in New Orleans for several years, working in heavy industry, largely corporate and occupational safety and health. So I was doing a lot of like on-site drill rig kind of safety and health inspections, kicking metal around kind of thing, and got involved into the sort of business efficiency associated with it, understanding the safety and health implications of your business and why that matters. And it kept coming back to moving things around is so taken for granted as a means to improve the business. And so you look at the role that diesel plays, particularly in that space, and that led me to the EPA. I was happy to have served the EPA during the first Obama administration when the National Clean Diesel Program was starting, and ran a team that was responsible for doling out a lot of the Recovery Act funds. This is back in 2009 now. And at that time, that was a $300 million program, that slug of money that the EPA got to dole out from Recovery Act funds. And it's always amazing to me to think about the context of what that fund meant to the market at that time. And then now you go out and look at a solicitation, most recent EPA solicitation is now a couple $100 million. There's some California funding that's like $350 million. And the most recent California budget for clean transportation was like $1.x billion. Just massive numbers on an annual basis. Whereas the Recovery Act was this like huge slug of money that was meant to solve all the problems for good.
Yeah.
And now, the market has so evolved from that perspective that it's just really fascinating to see. And so from my time at EPA, I joined up with Gladstein Neandros and Associates in 2013. And, since evolved a career from then, looking at, various iterations of new projects. And the most recent, it's been probably 5-6 years. I don't think you can call it a trend anymore. It's just kind of the way things has been in the electrification space, the role of zero emission. It's been, really since kind of 2018, 2019, heavy duty trucking has made big moves, and there's a lot going on in zero emission. And that's been the big chatter.
So I was introduced to you by DHL.
Yeah.
Was that kind of your first connection in the industry? How did you kind of make your way into GSE?
Yeah, within the aviation and GSE space, we've always been tangential at airports, but we haven't been on the tarmac side. We've been on the passenger side. And so like a lot of our projects historically have been with shuttle buses. Medium and heavy duty transportation is our sweet spot.
Okay.
And so on the front, the front of the airport, if you want to call it that, with shuttle buses, terminals, and the need to refuel and recharge those vehicles, we've been doing those projects for 25 years. And so looking again, we kind of always look at the movement of molecules and say, okay, well, we've addressed that here. So with our friends at LAWA or Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, these kind of partners, as you go through their sustainability programs, you just kind of pick off areas. And so we picked off those front areas. Okay, we got the shuttle buses and the terminal side. And now let's look at some of the land side movements. And the volume opportunity of GSE started really appealing to a lot of our partners. But it is such a busy from a number of companies involved perspective, but busy from a responsibility perspective too. Because is it the aviation authority? Is it the airline? Is it the operator? There's so many different personalities, I suppose, right?
Sure. Yes.
That you could look at it that way. But it's a great opportunity to improve so many different elements. And so from a grants perspective, it's very attractive from funding agencies because they want to, if you look at a grant as an investment, these funding agencies look at grants as investments in air quality and investments in public health. You're never going to see an airport in like a super high class community. That's just not how real estate dynamics work. And so you often have this tremendous opportunity to improve public health benefits in disadvantaged communities because those are the ones that are neighboring airports. But also you're looking at an extremely exposed population for aircraft personnel, for people working on the tarmac. And so from an exposure perspective, if you can limit tailpipe emission exposure for these personnel, both the employees as well as the neighboring communities, there's huge public health benefits. You're talking like, it's some of the EPA math is like $13 to $15 in public health benefits for every dollar invested in a clean diesel project.
Wow. Yeah.
It's from asthma to premature death. There's pretty dynamic benefits associated with these projects.
Yeah. So GSE, obviously we're moving,
Yeah.
we're making the move towards
Very much
electric. All the airlines have their ESG goals, ground handlers have their own ESG goals, and then the airports as well, and the airport authorities. And it's just everybody's trying to figure out, where this infrastructure is going to come from. Right. And I kind of think that's the reason we're here today is kind of talk about that. Right. So there's been Vail grant that I'm sure that you can talk to us about.
Yep.
and the VW. Right.
Yeah. Still around.
It's still around. And then what other ones are kind of like the bigger ones that people are working on?
Sure. Well, you're right. Vail and VW are very much the two big linchpins right now. From a charging perspective, we can't overlook the role that the DERA programs, DERA programs play. Most states, as well as there's a federal version of it. So it's something to consider. Now, you do have to do a vehicle with it. It's not just infrastructure only, so you do have to seek vehicle funding at the same time. But that's very much on the available list of funding opportunities. With VW specifically, it's interesting that you brought that up. You're absolutely right. It's been around coming on 9 years, which is wild. Now that has an original 10-year shelf life.
Okay.
If states don't use their funds, those unused funds roll up into a pot and then get redistributed to the states that did use all their funds for another 5 years of spending. So in those states that have been very aggressive with their VW program, and it's the states you would think, it's typical, population center rich states, you're going to see VW money stick around, which is great. That continues the opportunity. With Vail, the FAA has done a very nice job of supporting that program on an annual basis. That November 1 deadline keeps coming around and it keeps coming around. And then they have their sort of pre-application concept deal in November. And then once you go into full applications, you're kind of in the January, February timeline. But that program is very active and they've been adding on sort of ancillary funding streams to the Vail program. There's a zero emission pilot program now. And some really good focused funding that aviation authorities have been very proactive in taking. Beyond that, it really comes down to the state level. And I think that's where we're going to see things get really busy, particularly with the new administration, is that with we would expect a smaller federal government to look like, states get very busy. States start taking upon themselves to fund these programs, to find their own opportunities rather than kind of look up at the EPA, at the US EPA or US DOT. They say, okay, well, what can we as the local state Department of Environmental Quality, what can we do on our own? How can we fund it? And so while the individual states' funding pots will be less, there'll just be more of them. And I think that's really presents as a unique opportunity to look at over the next couple of years to see how that transition happens and to see what states start setting their own parameters, their own goals, their own guidelines, what their sustainability initiatives line up with, like you mentioned, the aviation authorities or the airlines or the aircraft operator or the GSE operators, how those all kind of dovetail. And so that's where a lot of the noise is coming from right now, is how do you rejigger those solutions to kind of align with your own state's efforts.
So okay, like with an airport,
Yeah.
can they actually go after a grant like these Vail grants and the VW grants specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So
And they have, right?
Absolutely. So aviation
Yeah.
authorities are the ones that have to go after the Vail grants. They're the
Okay.
eligible entity.
Yep.
For some of the other programs, like if you were to chase DERA money, you'd actually need a nonprofit to get out in front and to serve as the eligible applicant.
Okay.
And then you would slot, the aviation authority, the airline, or the GSE operator behind that nonprofit. It all depends on the funding program's requirements. So there's some where, the airline can go directly apply for it themselves, or the GSE operator can go directly apply for it themselves. That's a really clean way to do it. But some of these other programs, you're going to have to go in with a team or potentially as a sub, which makes it a little convoluted.
So if I'm an airline
Mm-hmm.
and can I come to you and say, hey, what's available to me? And you all go out and find these opportunities?
Exactly. Yeah. We put together that landscape to basically present the menu of options. And some of these menus are going to be 2 or 3 steps down the road, because it's like, okay, I want to eventually get there with that particular program, but I need to find the sponsor first. And then I need to dovetail my project with something else that the aviation authority has to be doing. Like a Vail grant, the aviation authority are often going to put together 5 or 6 different projects as part of Vail. So, if I'm Atlanta, their aviation authority did a solar project, and they're doing a new terminal renovation, and then maybe they're doing some GSE chargers hanging underneath, Terminal T or whatever. Your particular project could be one of several that has to fit under that Vail umbrella. Whereas other funding programs, you may be the lone wolf. You may be the project, and so you got to go in and kind of stand up on your own. It all depends on the structure of that funding program and what it is that the agency wants to fund. That's one of the keys that we do a lot of storytelling. Grant writing is storytelling, and so we do a lot of storytelling. And one of the first keys that we focus on is you're not, you applicant are not necessarily telling your story. We have to tell the story that the agency wants to hear. Now, if your story happens to dovetail with that, great. But we need to tell the story that gets to the funding, not to the story that your corporate marketing team wants to spin.
Yeah.
So, it's not that we clash with marketing groups or anything like that, but we have to tell a very specific, very defined, kind of set of talking points that a lot of times focus on public health, emissions reductions, sustainability, and efficient use of federal funding or state funding in certain cases. So
there's a possibility to go down this route and not get the grant.
Very much. Yeah, absolutely. These aren't handouts. There are no guarantees in this landscape. We've been very successful. We have a 90% success rate in winning these awards, but we say no a lot. And there's a lot of off ramps before we ever get to an application. And so when we're kind of evaluating the landscape of opportunities, we're going to throw out a huge chunk of funding opportunities at the very, very outset, because it's either not relevant. You're not going to be, you may be eligible, but you're not going to be competitive. I'll give you an example. There has been a huge sweet spot of funding for electric school buses recently.
Okay.
But politically, very easy win to fund an electric school bus project. But if you look at cost effectiveness perspective, it's not the best use of funds. These are vehicles that only run a few hours a day. They're not huge consumers of fuel. And so we know that from a political perspective, if we're trying to put a project up against what we know to be a very active school bus applicant pool, we'll probably pull back our project because we know we'll get smoked by school bus applicants. They're just easier to fund.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? So,
their story's better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. If we know we're going up against, marine diesel repowers or diesel replacement projects, those are hugely cost effective and look way better from a public health benefits perspective versus even a truck or a bus. And so we'll scale back those applications if we know what the other competitors are going to be doing. So we're very sensitive to that.
But there are some specific ones just to aviation.
FAA is the one that is specific to just aviation. There are other programs that so there's some programs right now in Texas that, and we appreciate what the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality has done, is they've specifically called out types of GSE that are eligible for funding.
Oh, wow.
Which has been a huge boon for a lot of projects in Houston and San Antonio and Dallas in particular, because those types of vehicles weren't eligible in prior rounds.
Okay.
And so whereas these vehicles couldn't compete even 2 years ago, they're now competing and winning funds, which has been a great thing for that particular market. But you have to really dig deep into some of these RFPs because they'll have a section on eligible vehicle types. And 2 years ago, if you read that RFP, it would said GSE is not eligible. Whereas now it's pushback tractors and cargo handlers are eligible specifically, but not tow, right? So
So baggage tractor is not,
right?
But a pushback is.
Yeah, and so you kind of look into this and you say, okay, well, clearly some lobbyist got something through at some point, so great, but so you got to really read the fine details in some of these things because, man, there's no better way to waste a whole bunch of time and money than to apply something that you're not eligible for.
Do you ever see states kind of follow suit and start doing that same thing? Like Oklahoma will all of a sudden try to match that and do ground support equipment, or is that less likely?
It's a good question. We haven't seen that particular thing with ground support equipment.
Okay.
We've seen a lot of follow the leaders with charging, public charging particularly, which hurts GSE from a competitive standpoint because GSE isn't public charging, right?
That's what I was about to ask you. Yeah, I guarantee they don't fall underneath that.
There's been a huge amount of chatter about NEVI funding, for example. NEVI has no bearing on the GSE space because it's not public charging. So the GSE guys can't go after those funds. And you're talking about billions in funding.
Yeah.
Not eligible. It's just not relevant to the market. And so there's a lot... There's a lot to learn from that because so many states just simply say, okay, but you've got to make it eligible for everybody. It's got to be publicly available, which then kicks out any project that we could possibly do for GSE.
So knowing power and stuff, this is kind of in your career. Do you see hydrogen being a thing? I know we're kind of getting off topic of grants right now, but I'm just more curious, other in biofuels, things like that. Or do you kind of see everything still moving towards electric, really?
Oh, no. I believe in the power of silver buckshot versus silver bullet. Okay. And so what I mean by that is I don't think there is one solution. I think there's trends moving towards zero via battery electric. The costs of those products haven't reduced to the point where the market has fully accepted them.
Exactly.
If you took 5 years ago, there was a lot of yes, we're going to get there. That's going to be, cost parity with diesel over time, right? The TCO model. We haven't gotten there. Things have stayed expensive. And so I think that combined with what happened in the election 2 weeks ago is you're going to see a focus on diversified fuel solutions over the next several years. I think natural gas is going to come back as a little bit of a renaissance. Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Domestic fuel product.
I like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's domestic. It's widely available. There is a renewable product that is very, very acceptable in most solutions. So I think natural gas and propane are still very much in the conversation as an alternative fuel. Hydrogen has its place. Hydrogen is still very expensive and very heavy. And in applications where cost and weight are particularly sensitive issues, like over-the-road trucking, for example, you're not going to want to give up a huge amount of your payload just so you can run an alternative fuel because that's the stuff in the back of your truck is how you get paid.
Exactly.
And so if you have to offset that with a bunch of fuel, that doesn't pencil out quite well. I do think hydrogen is going to come around and continue evolving. I think particularly from a renewable perspective, like blue or green hydrogen, has a very interesting roadmap and something that we're keeping an eye on.
Yeah, we've seen a couple of different companies, try to get kind of hydrogen going,
Sure.
and it seems like it's always kind of hitting roadblocks. It's
I think one of the things that I still am totally fascinated by. We did a lot of work in New York City over the years on gaseous fuels and compressed gas, and if you look, the bridge and tunnel authorities still don't allow compressed natural gas vehicles through the bridges and tunnels because of an explosion that happened on Staten Island in the 70s. And so there's still these roadblocks in place to this stuff, that the advancement of technology. And it's very easy to make the joke about the Hindenburg too, right? Like that's always near to the hydrogen space, and you have to sort of, okay, that's not exactly what we're talking about.
It's not relevant anymore.
It's not a thing that happens, and so there's still a lot of education, and I'm not knocking the fire departments or anything like that. There's absolutely safety risk issues with these kind of things. Mm-hmm. Battery fires are still a real thing, and so you have to do a lot of safety. And if you look at some of the aviation equipment now that we're putting out there, I'm particularly fascinated about the autonomous stuff, and there's some wild labor implications about autonomous vehicles taking away from the workforce. Obviously, that's a separate issue. But you start thinking about autonomous and the role that it plays on an airport tarmac, for example, and it's like, well, an autonomous vehicle delivering my DoorDash dinner, running around and like accidentally running into a lamppost is one issue, but an autonomous vehicle that runs into a multi-million-dollar aircraft is a very different one.
Yeah.
And so you kind of look at the advancement of technology, and there's so many more sensitive receptors in the aviation space that have to be vetted. You got to kind of navigate that.
So if you were, if you wanted to talk to somebody like a ground handler or an airline or an airport, like who are you targeting at this moment? All three?
From how I develop business, it's I like to talk to the people that are bringing the products forth first.
Okay.
From understanding what is available. You can't really understand what's going to be adopted until you understand the technologies that are adoptable. And so understanding first what's available, what's on the horizon of technology is important, because if you look at it, the way that I look at it is I have my funding over here, and then I need to understand what my technology is over here. Everybody else I'm going to talk to is going to be in the middle somewhere, because they're going to need the funding to do the technology, or they need to buy the technology because of their sustainability or corporate initiatives. And so then they realize how much that costs, and then they need the funding. But I represent the awareness of the funding over here. I need to first understand the awareness of the technology over here. And so that's why guys like Oshkosh are so important to the market right now, because they have such a keen sense of what technology, what the capabilities of a current technology are, and what they can bring to market, and then what the future of those technologies looks like, and the relationships that they play. So for me, I always start with technology.
So you like to talk to the OEMs first?
Very much.
Try to figure out what they're doing, what they're looking for in the future,
correct,
what they're kind of working on. So
because everybody else has goals, the OEMs have the ability to achieve those goals. And so from a market adoption rate perspective, knowing the types of technology and the volumes in which they can be produced is absolutely critical.
So are you all working with any OEMs on?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's been the partnerships thus far that have made it viable to do any of the work that we've done in the GSE space, is to understand exactly when these things are going to come out. Remember, like I said, these are contracts, executable contracts with government agencies, and it's money, but the strange bedfellow to money is time. And so in a lot of these grants, you have to commit to certain timelines and say, okay, in Q1 of this year, I'm going to have 2 of my 5 GSE deployed. And then the next Q, I'm going to have the 2, and then the next quarter is the final 5th. I can't make any of those claims. I can't make any and substantiate any of that until I know from the technology perspective when it's going to be produced, how, and if it's even going to be available to be delivered. And so that's why it's so critical to have those types of relationships very early on, is to know the potential for opportunity with deploying this technology. The government agencies want to move the money as quickly as possible, particularly now with the administration change. And so if you're coming in and saying, okay, we've got this great new technology, but it's not going to be ready for 36 months, it's a hard sell.
Yeah.
But if you got something you can put 12, 18 months on, that's a horse of a different color.
Yeah. So how does that, I mean, kind of walk me through that. So Oshkosh comes to you and says, hey, we're developing this new pushback.
Right.
I mean, how do you help them? Like what does that look like?
Well, if it's a new technology, if it's not something that they're intending to be, okay, this is like the next commercially viable product for us, this is commercial ready, then we're going to look at a whole different set of grant funding opportunities. The lion's share of grant money out there is for commercial sales, for publicly, it's a product that you can go buy in the market and deploy it in the next whatever months.
Yep.
But if this is new technology, you're looking in the domain of the research, demonstration and deployment. This is all pre-commercial stuff. And so you're looking at deployment volumes of like 1, 2, 3 units, all pre-commercial. And so that's a much smaller volume of incentive programs, but higher dollar associated with it because it's higher risk, higher reward. And so we would start there. If it's a technology that Oshkosh in this particular case wants to bring to market that is a commercial unit, is commercial sales, then that opens us up to any number of incentive programs. And it's really going to be driven by geography. So is this, are we selling to an airline with just a presence on the West Coast? Is this something that, you're doing at like the 5 major hubs for this particular airline? So we got to go knock off Atlanta, New York, Detroit, and LA. And then so the geography will drive that next step in terms of paring down the list of available incentives. Once we have that, then we got to look at the palatability of the incentives with Oshkosh's or whoever the manufacturer's partner is. So we work with some companies who are very sensitive to public recognition, particularly associated with getting government funds. Bigger corporations sometimes don't want to be perceived as taking funding from the government.
Yeah.
It's a bad look in some cases. And so there are certain programs where we can structure the company's involvement so they're not like at the forefront of it. It's like, X, Y, and Z company gets $1 million to do this. We can structure it in such a way where a nonprofit is involved, a neighborhood organization is involved, and they're getting a lot of the public benefit of the grant funding. But from a investment perspective, there's still air quality benefits associated because we're still putting technology out. And so that's where we get to the viability perspective. And then the last thing is just competitiveness. What do we as TRC know about the market to say who else is going to apply for this funding? If it's just a knockdown, drag out fight, then we'll be sensitive to it and we'll come in, with our boxing gloves on. But if it's something that's like, okay, every school bus operator and their uncle are going after this funding, and politically speaking, it's going to look better for the agency to fund those projects, like I said, we'll throttle back.
So what about like research and development? So Oshkosh comes to you and says, hey, we'd like to develop this, biofuel, cargo loader. But that's, it's 6 years out or whatever. Is there funds for that kind of stuff available as well?
Yeah. And that's really been the purview of the Department of Energy historically. Their vehicle technologies office has been outstanding in supporting high risk, high reward, pre-commercial demonstration, not only like full vehicle and full apparatus, but also components. So putting on a test bed or putting on a dynamometer and just kind of testing these things out. There's been a huge amount of investment that the DOE and the Vehicle Technologies Office in particular has made in the market to support pre-commercial demonstration projects. That's really the main one that we look to from an R&D perspective. We can also look at, there's some agencies within California that have both then this is where it gets a little sensitive because you talk about funding availability. Really, the DOE and California are the only ones that have sufficient funding to be able to make these types of investments. And so when you look at, like the South Coast Air Quality Management District, which is the government agency responsible for air quality in Los Angeles, they've done a nice job over the years of funding these types of pre-commercial projects that allow for greater innovation. And it's only available because of how historically poor that air quality has been, which is a function of their geography and prevailing winds and things like that. But they're, autonomous rail and, all sorts of really cool stuff, and hydrogen barges and tugs in the ports, and, really cool cutting edge stuff. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that as well.
Now, what if I'm a semi-small ground handler,
Sure.
right? And I just have a couple stations here or there where I've got contracts with airlines. Is there money out there for me as a ground handler?
Yeah.
To try to convert my fleet to electric?
Absolutely.
I maybe have a bunch of old internal combustion.
There's no incentive program out there that stipulates your company has to be of a certain size to chase these funds. It's a resource issue, and obviously smaller companies are going to be resource constrained, but this funding is available for the market, not for certain people in the market.
Yeah.
And so, when it comes down to chasing it, it's gumption and resources. Obviously, it's a little easier for bigger companies to go chase this kind of stuff just because of size. But no, there's certainly available opportunity for smaller companies. And actually, I talked a little bit earlier about storytelling. It's often a little easier to tell the smaller guy's story because it's, hey, we're doing the right thing because you don't need to make the mom and pop card. You don't need to play that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we're doing the right thing for us because we're focused here. And that story has a lot of legs, and it's a viable one.
Yeah, and then talk to me about kind of charging at the airport.
Yeah.
So I've heard, obviously, everybody's talking about how there's not enough infrastructure, but is there actually even enough like grid power in some cases? And then are they also looking at, or are there different power companies that are applying to different grants because there's not even enough grid power to even, have enough infrastructure at that airport type of thing?
Yeah.
Like forget the fact that there's not enough chargers. Even if they put in enough chargers, there's not enough,
It's a great question. That has been far and away the toughest nut to crack, the infrastructure challenge. And this isn't an aviation specific thing. It's very easy to say, okay, well, since we're like behind the fence kind of thing, it's harder for us. We've got less available land. We've got to deal with the aviation authority and the terminal and the baggage, all that kind of, those are all challenges that are unique to the aviation space. But the infrastructure challenge writ large across on-road, off-road, medium and heavy duty, everybody is struggling with charging infrastructure. And it comes down to the availability of power. And when you look at that, you can't make any sort of general assessments to say, okay, everybody's struggling with the availability of power. There's power available in a lot of locations. In some, there isn't. But maybe the power is available, but the infrastructure to get the power to that site is so dated that it presents as a safety risk. California being one of them, those fire hazards as of late has been a real issue. And that's because of a dated infrastructure. Or you say, hey man, we just don't have enough power at all. We're never going to be able to support this. Or you have a utility that's so backlogged to say, okay, we do have available power, but it's going to take 48 months for us to put sufficient transmission in place to even get the power to the site. There's so many different variables in play when it comes to the movement of electrons to an airport that every single aviation project we undertake, it's a new set of challenges. But it all falls under that banner of infrastructure.
So it's a really,
Sure.
I don't even know if you're going to be able to answer this, but I mean, a lot of these airlines and ground handlers have ESG goals.
Yeah.
Airports do too. Are they going to be able to meet these goals based on the amount of infrastructure challenges that they're facing?
It's impossible to say. I mean, I hope so. As somebody, my son has breathing challenges and health issues associated with it, and so like I am keenly invested in making this place better for breathers, kind of thing. As addressing corporate goals, man, I sure hope so, but I could never stand and say, yes, it's a guarantee that you're going to hit it.
Yeah.
There's no right answer to that. There's probably no answer to that at this point.
No, not at this point. So then how do you see, without getting into a political conversation, like, what's the difference going to be kind of like as we're looking towards the future with this new president coming in?
So I'll start granularly.
Okay.
And then I'll some larger thoughts. There are some interim technology solutions out there right now that make electrified GSE completely and totally viable immediately. And you look at, power carts, amp carts kind of deal.
Yep.
that is an outstanding solution. We're seeing it in San Diego. You mentioned DHL earlier, and that was where that relationship started.
I'm actually going to interview Chad Reese.
Cool.
From San Diego.
Oh, super.
Yeah, at the end of next year, or beginning of next year.
That makes this stuff real. You don't need to wait. I mean, we're seeing some of my best projects are going to be 12 to 18 months out. You're seeing this, with a mobile recharging solution, you're talking weeks instead of months and years. And that's a really big deal. And so from an interim solution perspective, that is what has me most excited, is that you're making charging, you're taking out the challenge of charging infrastructure, or at least you're softening that blow, and making it a viable solution more immediately. Now, why I'm excited about stuff like that is because the U.S. has some big things coming up. We've got World Cup in North America here in a year and a half, and then LA has the games in 28. And those are big, big public things. And a lot of it, there's a lot of people moving through airports for those kind of things. So from the aviation space, being able to present those types of solutions to a world that is ready for them, pretty cool. I'm excited about that. So granularly, I know I went very big, very fast there, but granularly, the interim solutions, I think there are interim solutions available right now that can make an absolutely immediate and lasting impact on the landscape. Now, in terms of some of the political dynamics that we're going to see, one of the things that has me considerably less freaked out from as significant of an administration change as this is that we've already done this. We did this 8 years ago. We saw a pretty dynamic flip of the White House's stripes 8 years ago. And so we're prepared for what we see to be a considerably smaller federal spend and also a considerably deregulated market. And so, there's any number of ways you can take those things. I'm speaking specifically to clean transportation and to the transportation space. When you look federally at the likelihood of less regulations, what that means is you look more at what states are going to do. What is California going to do? What are the 15 or whatever number of states that follow California's regulations? What are they going to do? And that's where it gets really interesting because it empowers at the state level their regulatory drivers. So that's something we want to watch. And then from an incentives and spending perspective, the feds are going to spend less. That's just sort of a Republican paradigm. But it emboldens corporations to implement more of their culture on the market by the availability of typically what we're going to see is cheaper debt, which means bigger corporate spending. And so corporations now have, kind of that seat at their own particular helm of making their own decisions and going out and doing bigger spends. Now, it'll be up to the corporations on how they spend those funds. We've already seen some interesting indications of how folks are going to do that, from corporate sustainability or DEI or, any number of those initiatives. So that's where really the transition points that we're going to see those big inflection points on one, a likely deregulated market, and two, who's going to do the spending and how they're going to spend it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, Elon getting involved could maybe help with infrastructure, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to see how quickly he got integrated into this whole process from a political perspective. And then what he signals, it's really hard to bet against him.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
All the things that he does, it's really hard to bet against him. And so his role in the zero emission landscape in particular is going to be fascinating. Now he's coming off some tough challenges in the past year in the infrastructure space too. He's had a hard time. Nobody's really solved it yet from an infrastructure perspective. So it'll be interesting to see what that sort of roadmap, that network of zero emission recharging and refueling solutions is going to look like.
Yeah. Again, the reason I'm bringing that up is not to be political.
Yeah,
it's just because Elon is very involved in infrastructure and especially, in the United States and in North America specifically. So,
absolutely.
So, all right. Talk to me about what do you like, what do you want to get from this podcast today? So like, if somebody's listening to this and whether it be an airport, a ground handler, an airline, those are the people that usually listen to this podcast.
Sure.
What would you want them to reach out about?
I think the thing that I'm most concerned about is this sense that it's not available to me. That an opportunity isn't available to me because I'm too small, or I'm at a third or fourth tier airport, or that I'm just a regional hauler, or I'm a smaller footprint, or something along those lines. And it's absolutely not the case. So I think for me, what I hope to get out of it is just audience engagement from the perspective of, let's at least try to uncover some stones, kind of turn over some opportunities and suss it out. We may get to a point where, immediately there isn't an incentive available for 6-12 months. But looking ahead, maybe with some partnerships, maybe a new market entrant opportunity, there's something for you. So I think that just from an education perspective, that's really what I'm hoping for.
So if I'm at a small regional airport in Alabama or something, we have a couple flights a day in from Delta and Allegiant or whatever. So I contact you, and so you're going to start digging, seeing what you can find to maybe help get that electrification into your airport, that infrastructure there, and you have to pay less for it, right? Because you're going to get a grant of some sort.
Yep.
But you all don't find anything. Is this something where 6 months go by and maybe something comes up? Will you all contact those people?
For sure.
Like kind of keep an eye out for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our my business is predicated on strong relationships. Our clients are 10, 15, 20-year term clients. These guys are in it for the long haul. And so we're not, our business isn't successful because we know all the answers. Our business is successful because we know where to find the answers. And if we don't have them, then we'll eventually figure it out. And so those long-term opportunities, those long-term relationships is what we pride ourselves on. And so, if we don't find something immediately available in Montgomery, my team has an Alabama specialist that just tracks money in Alabama. And so, we're going to put a flag on that account and say, all right, man, let's just check in every quarter and see what's happening. So we'll absolutely circle back around.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's a thing that is needed. That's the reason when I met you and we started talking, I was like, you'd be perfect for the podcast, because there's so many people out there listening, and there is so much money that's going to be spent on new equipment. Yeah. Right. And if they can find a grant to help them out with that and save millions of dollars, I mean, I think that's a pretty big win.
For sure. And it really depends on how you want to approach it and what your ultimate end goals are. I mean, I can very readily play the marketing game. This winning a grant looks great for your company.
Yeah.
And we can spin that marketing perspective. We can also play the altruist. We can play the financial guy. There's any different number of ways that you can use these grants to tell your own corporate story. And whether it be through a marketing perspective or sustainability or a fiduciary responsibility, whatever the case may be, there's the opportunity for that.
So would you mind like sharing a success story with me? And
sure.
And even if you can't bring up a name specifically or whatever, just kind of any success story, so somebody can kind of hear that and go, oh, okay, that could be me. I see why I need to be working with Joe.
Yeah. I think the one of the ones that comes to mind recently is Denver is a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
To get to and to get through, and but it's one of those airports that the city has grown out to meet it. If you flew through Denver 15 years ago, there was nothing.
Okay.
And now the city has come out, and so there's neighborhoods coming up and building, and so the need for to be that sort of Colorado, like cleaner, that sort of persona, the need for that has really come about. And so we worked with an airline out there to work on the sustainability of their operations. Now they already have very aggressive GSE goals, but they hit an impasse because just the sheer capital expenditures of achieving those goals is a challenge. But also just the availability of equipment wasn't there. And so we worked with them to identify one funding that overcame both of those. It was enough money where the capital expenditures were palatable for the company, but it was slow enough money that they could deploy the equipment over a 2 to 4 year timeline in staggered volumes, right? It wasn't just a big slug of deliveries coming and say, okay, put it out there. What I was most proud of that project was the relationship with the utility, though. and making sure that we get the right power in the right places on site to make the deployment successful, and keeping all the parties happy. And the Aviation Authority obviously supported all along the way. We had to be very transparent and communicative about the whole thing because it is an incursion on their land, right? The airline doesn't own those terminals. They don't get a final say, nor does the ground handler. And so making sure that we have all the partnerships in play and that the owner of the land ultimately has the thumbs up approval to allow, put in all those chargers in the bag rooms and whatever the case may be. So that was something that I was really proud of. And we got, some nice features from the local partners and it's a good project for us.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And the cool thing about that is the replicability and the scalability of these projects are so ready and so obviously like, okay, if we can do that here, let's do that in a whole bunch of other places. If you look at the European market, it's exceptional to go over and fly through Schiphol and throw some of these bigger hubs there. It's just electrification is just what they do.
Mm-hmm.
It's not new. It's not innovative. It's just the right choice.
Yeah.
And so trying to think about how, you got to take yourself like 10, 15 years back and say, well, what decision did you make 10 or 15 years ago that allowed you to come to this? And, if you a place like Amsterdam, I mean, that airport runs off of wind, the whole thing, just Dutch wind. It's phenomenal.
That's insane.
It's so cool. But it's an investment they made. And so coming back to the Denver project, that was everything had to tie into a greater goal, right? It's not just this little electric tug that is going to make a difference. It's where the electron comes from that powers that tug. It's how that operator now has new skills associated with his job, and it's ultimately his safety, the public safety, and health benefits, right? So everything has to kind of tie back to that greater goal.
Gotcha. And then does TRC operate worldwide, or is it just North America, or just United States? Like, kind of dive into that real quick.
We are predominantly North America and Europe.
Okay.
We have worldwide projects, but our biggest footprint right now is North America and Europe. We have a big team in London, growing team in mainland Europe, and then the lion's share, far and away, of our workforce is in the U.S.
Okay. And then what was the first GSE show that you attended?
Oh,
because I met you at GHI Toronto. And was that your first show, or had you been to a couple different ones?
I think the first dedicated show was in Toronto.
Okay.
There's been some GSE show there's been some GSE product at some other shows like CES or something like that, right? They're sort of tangential, but not dedicated. But yeah, Toronto was the first one. I was in Lisbon here recently last month.
Yep.
And then I'll be in Barcelona next month.
Yeah. So what are you going to be doing in Barcelona? I know you're going to be speaking, right?
Yeah, I'm on the agenda. My talk. I'm on a panel on the Tuesday afternoon, the 3rd. It's a technology and implementation panel. So looking at sort of the new what's next in the market and then how to get there. So I can't speak to technology. I'm no chemist, and you've got to be a chemist at this point to understand batteries. But I'm on the how to get there side of things. If we've got something new, how do we find the resources, the partners, the funding to get to that point? So I'll be speaking in Barcelona on December 3rd.
Nice.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah. That'll be a great show.
I'm excited.
I think. Yeah. And have you found the GSE industry to be?
It's incredibly receptive and willing. I mean, there's some of the other markets that we work in are incredibly entrenched. And what I mean is like, okay, we've done this for 50 years. It's just how we do it, which is fine. They're probably right in some cases. But I've been particularly impressed with the GSE space and the ground handlers for their willingness to not accept change, but foment change. Their willingness to actively diversify or actively modify their operations. I was lucky enough to be invited to a Delta event this year and looking at all the vendors bringing their new products and sprayers and de-icers and all sorts of stuff. I mean, it's just phenomenal, and how quickly that stuff comes about. That's product that didn't exist 8 months ago, 9 months ago, 10, kind of thing. And so now how quickly it comes about, and then it's adopted and integrated into, it's just incredible how quickly this particular market moves.
Yeah. And then I don't know, I don't think I asked this, but talk to me. So if I come to you tomorrow, like what does the process kind of look like?
We're going to understand the needs first. So if you come to me, I need to understand what it is. And the answer can be, hey, I just need money for a new product. Cool. That's fine. That's what a grant.
That's a good enough answer.
Yeah, that's fine. That's totally sufficient.
Gotcha.
I don't need to get into the whole, religious idiom of what you're approaching here. Right.
Uh-huh.
There can be a more detailed answer, or it can be simple as just, I need dollars. The next question is going to be where. This market is hugely driven by geography. I can't give you the same answer in Atlanta as I can give you in San Francisco, as I can give you in Boston. It will be
because there's so much state funding.
Correct.
Okay.
And also the local utility. If you're talking about zero emission solutions, the utility has to be involved.
Okay.
And so the difference between an Alabama Power and a Georgia Power and all these different groups, even though regionally they're owned by the same Southern, they're going to have they're each has their own particular process. And so my answers will be driven by geography. And then the next one is what is the funding need? Is there a particular line in the sand that you have to cross to make this viable? Is it $50K per unit, $100K per unit, or is it a different type of project? The role of infrastructure. Do you need a charger associated with your equipment? We'll go through that process. All of that allows me to paint the landscape picture for you. Once we have that, then we start going down the project implementation phase.
Okay, then it's like these would be the ones that are available. These are the ones that we think you'd actually have a shot at.
Correct.
And then these are the ones we're going to apply for.
Available and when. I mean, the part that I enjoy the most is the forward vision. So once I understand what the landscape looks like for you, then we start penciling out, okay, in 6 months we're looking here, 12 months we're looking here. My crystal ball is good enough to about 18 to 24 months out. Anything beyond that gets real hard to see from an incentives perspective. Now, my crystal ball took some cracks over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I can't see as far as I'd like to these days. But historically speaking, I can kind of see a year plus out. And so if I start scheduling things out, because if you're buying product, you don't buy for today. You're buying for a year, you're buying for 18 months, you're buying for 24 months. So allowing me to schedule in incentives that I see into your procurement horizon really becomes the business model that I like to implement, because it allows us to get much more integrated much more quickly.
Now, this VW grant, you said it's up in a year?
Yeah, so the first 10 years, in your state. Yeah.
Okay. So then how long does it take to apply? Like if I came to you tomorrow and I'm like, hey, I want to go after that VW, it's the last year. Is that something that's even possible? Like how long does it take for these things to kind of take place?
Unfortunately, one of the knocks about the grant and one of the frustrations about working with grants is that it feels like you're hurrying up to wait. And that is true in a lot of cases, because you do kind of have to get all your ducks in a row real quick. And then okay, well, now I got to wait for 6 months until that program opens. That is the case. And so in an ideal life cycle, typically, let's say we start building out a landscape and I say, okay, Matt, there's a program that's going to open December 1 in Atlanta, and we're going to apply for that. If we apply in December, award notifications come in April, May. It'll take 4 or 5 months, 6 months, in some cases, to come back. Then you got to negotiate with the agency to get that award, right? Terms and conditions, your legal's got to get involved, all that kind of stuff. That takes 3 months. And then, so you're looking at now, we've applied in December, you're now looking at next August by the time you can even start the project. And then you've got a 2 or 3 year window to implement it.
Okay.
So it's
there's got to be milestones that you hit and all these different things. And that's you help the entire way through the process.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the big things is people often take for granted that these awards, like I said, aren't just sort of charitable handouts. They come with a bunch of strings attached.
Oh, yeah.
There's monthly, quarterly, and annual milestones associated with all these grants, and you've got to report on them to a sufficient point where the agency says, yes, okay, we'll keep sending you money, right? A lot of these grants aren't payouts at the outset. The project partners have to typically spend the money first and then show proof of that spend to get reimbursed for it. So there is a capital front to a lot of this.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody would do it without a company like a TRC to help them through the process. I mean, are there though companies that try to do this by themselves and are able to do it?
Well, there are plenty that can.
Are they like Fortune 250 companies type of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a lot of times these guys have a dedicated team. Like they'll have a dedicated grants team.
Okay. Yep.
That does the life cycle approach. Now we help a lot of those companies too, because it is resource intensive. A lot of these companies can't just I have 25 people that go out and track grants, and then we have a team of about 50 grant writers. There's no other company that can like just build that on their own.
Yeah.
So being able to supplement their team with mine allows for a lot of efficiency.
Okay.
Right. And so that's kind of the idea, is that we're not trying to do it all. We oftentimes play a supplemental role, but it adds, an extra amount of horsepower that would otherwise be unavailable to these companies.
So you all can do it all by your own, or you can supplement.
Yep, absolutely. So we there's clients of ours that we're their back office effectively for grants that we are sort of built in with them. And there are other companies who are, massive, Fortune 50s that use us for supplemental, sort of that extra bit of overdrive.
Nice.
We can play those roles.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What haven't I covered? What haven't I asked you today?
Oh boy, the Jaguars' demise. We can go into that.
I don't. Do we want to go into that? I don't know if
DERA.
that's where. Well, I was kind of thinking more of the Saints' demise.
Sure.
Right?
Well, hey, we got to win yesterday.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. So we're putting that first place pick further away, which is a bummer. But
that's the only problem. Right?
Yeah. That's a tough thing about winning when you're terrible. No, it's been an honor, Matt. To kind of understand the market, and I think that's what I'm excited about going to see in Barcelona too, is because there's going to be a lot of Americans at the show, but that show, just by virtue of being in Europe, is going to see innovation that we would be otherwise not exposed to, and thought leaders from. I'm particularly excited to hear about some of the Eastern European and Asian markets come to speak about their efforts. And then I think the next big one's in Vegas in the spring. Looking at that show and kind of seeing kind of what's new, what's great. The next few months are going to be very busy, politically speaking, and just kind of understanding what this transition actually means for a lot of companies. Up to this election, the market has been very tentative. Corporations have been hesitant to make big spends because they didn't know which way the winds were going to blow. Well, we now know that, but it's incredibly blustery. And it's just really hard to see kind of where the firm footing is going to come from. So that will all be scheduled out over the next few months, I think. And so as we get a little bit more understanding of different initiatives and efforts, and we're starting to see cabinet picks come through now, I think it'll be very telling on what the market's going to bear over the next few years.
So last question here, because I've just started thinking of this. So I guess my question is, like, if you're looking at this like from a GSE exclusive perspective,
sure,
of we have right now electric and internal combustion. There's really no hydrogen really that I've seen really out into the airport. There's definitely some LP, especially in Denver,
very
as you were talking about, right? Kind of where do you see these landing in the next 5 years? Do you think we're going to do you think electric equipment will work perfect for bag tractors and belt loaders and pushbacks, but then you see maybe hydrogen for de-icers, or like what I guess, where do you see that, or do you see it all going electric? If you just had a crystal ball and Joe just had to guess with your amount of knowledge, is there stuff that other industries are using that we're not thinking about yet?
That's a good question. I think the role of renewables, even in zero emission solutions, but the role of renewables is going to take the forefront. You look at distributed energy resources. So, yes, you're going to put chargers underneath your terminal, but on the top, you're going to put solar to power those chargers. And so putting in energy management systems. So I think I'm not trying to sort of skirt what you're asking.
Okay.
But I think the role of where that power comes from and how it's managed is going to be more prominent than ultimately what is the propulsion system for the vehicle.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just because of how important the management of the energy is now, I think it's going to take more of the driver's seat than actually ultimately what propels that vehicle forward.
Do you think the U.S. is going to move towards nuclear power?
Oh, I mean, move again, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I know we're doing it, but I
Yeah.
just didn't know if you thought that there'd be more coming in, or
if you look at the forecasts for what zero emission freight movement and zero emission people movement could be in the future, you can't get there with the power generation that we have today.
Yeah. That's the reason I'm asking.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you thought that's going to be what we're going to be looking towards.
I mean, unless cold fusion comes soon, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard to get from A to B without
more
nuclear
power plants. Yeah.
So I don't see it.
Okay.
I don't see that the current power generation abilities get us from A to B.
Okay. Where we want to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, California is a great use case for that. Just the amount of power that they can provide is insufficient to meet the state's goals for zero emission transportation. Period.
Yeah.
So unless you're somehow going to build a bunch of new combustion programs or find a whole bunch of water that they don't have to provide for renewable power, I don't know how you're going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to look to the nuclear stuff.
Yeah. And then everybody's got a Tesla out there.
Yeah. I mean, and apparently everybody everywhere is going to have a Tesla soon enough. So,
that's
who
right.
knows?
Yeah.
Hard to say.
I don't have my electric car yet.
No.
Or do you?
No, I have a 1987 GMC Suburban.
It's very close.
Yeah.
It's super.
Yeah.
It's right there.
I'm hardly the zero emission evangelist.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't want to, I'm not trying to greenwash anybody because I am certainly not that persona.
Oh, that's hilarious. Awesome, man. Well, unless there's anything else, I mean,
appreciate the time.
This has been fantastic.
Yeah.
Very good learning experience for me, and I appreciate it. Sometimes I don't have all the right questions to ask you because you seem to know a lot about this space, but hopefully we got enough information out there today to kind of talk to people about what you do and how TRC can help out if that's the route that they choose to go. But I just really appreciate you coming on. Good luck in Barcelona.
Thank you.
I'm sure you'll kill your speaking engagement.
Looking forward to it. Appreciate the time, Matt.
All right, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the GSE Podcast. We hope you found it informative and engaging. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with your colleagues and peers in the ground support equipment community. Your support is invaluable to us. We'd appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate and review our podcast. Your feedback not only encourages us, but also helps expand our reach within the GSE community. Keep an eye out for more episodes as we continue to explore the dynamic world of ground operations, bringing you the latest trends, insights, and stories from the industry. Thank you for listening to the GSE Podcast. Until we meet again, stay grounded and keep pushing forward.